You're listening to the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered. We believe the Bible doesn't need to be watered down or cleaned up to be understood. Our goal is to provide a healing place to discuss the questions you can't ask and the context you won't learn in church. I'm your host, Colin Connor. Now, on to the episode. And we are back, and I am joined here today by not one, but two guests. To my right, I have the lovely Janna Connor.
Hello.
That you will recognize from some previous episodes. And if you think it is a question-response episode, that would be an educated guess based on her being here, not on the title of the episode. You probably know just off of the title. But the second guest I have is Stephanie Connor, my own mother.
Hello, everyone.
Wave to the crowd, Mom. Yeah. No, we're not recording this over video. Just had to ever do that. So we have these two lovely ladies here with me today because the day that this is being released is Mother's Day. If you grew up or went to a fundamentalist church or even a broadly evangelical type church, you know that Mother's Day sermons and special events, breakfasts, luncheons, they are a staple in evangelical churches. And I will just say right off the bat, I have never liked what churches do on Mother's Day. And some of you listening automatically know immediately what I'm talking about. You are right there with me. You're like, yeah, don't like the services on Mother's Day. And some of you listening might be surprised. You may never have thought of that before. And like, well, it's about celebrating mothers. What's wrong with that? Well, just hang on. We will get there. That is what this whole episode is about. So we are talking about Mother's Day here. And I wanted to do it a little bit ironically, since I hated Mother's Day specials in church so much, we get to do a Mother's Day special here on the podcast. And, I think that when we are talking about a particular group of people, it's better to invite that group in to be a part of the dialogue. Obviously, I am male, so if I am going to be talking about Mother's Day, it is worth having some women in here, and one in particular that is a mother, my own. So obviously, neither Janna nor my mom claim to speak for all women or all evangelical women or fundamental women, but they bring a different perspective to this than I would be able to. And we want to be able to listen to their sides of this, hear from their experiences. And later on in the podcast, we will hear from some other women on their thoughts on Mother's Day and church and all of that as well. I just want to say up front, too, that there is a lot that I will be critiquing about the way churches handle Mother's Day and related holidays. But I'm not against Mother's Day itself. I think it's totally fine and good to celebrate moms. Personally, I don't like most Hallmarky holidays. I just think that they're not so much about celebrating the person as they are an excuse for everyone else to feel better about the crappy ways we treat everyone else the rest of the year. Like, oh, I gave you some flowers on Mother's Day, so that just shows you how much I love you as a mom. But then I continue to not do anything nice for you the rest of the year. Or, Secretary's Day, or Pastor Appreciation, any of these special, quote-unquote, Hallmarky days. It's really just a way for everyone else to feel like, oh, okay, I showed them I love them. There's nothing wrong with a day for that, but if you need a day to get you to treat that person nicely, the problem's with you, and you might want to change up your schedule and do nicer stuff through the rest of the year. So, morally, no issue with Mother's Day or those holidays. I don't love them, but if you get some meaning out of them, that is totally fine, and I'm not trying to say that Mother's Day should not be recognized. But once it overlaps on the church calendar, funky things start happening. And it's not just Mother's Day, it's Father's Day, Veterans Day, Memorial Day. I don't have a problem with Christmas and Easter.
He doesn't have a problem with Christmas because that's his birthday.
It's because it's Jesus' birthday, Janna. This is about Jesus. We don't have to make this all about me. But yeah, and I did not none of us came from a liturgical tradition. Well, you did growing up. We'll get to that in a minute here. So, church holidays, I don't have a problem with. But once we start bringing in secular ones into the church calendar, it just gets messy. And we'll talk about all that in a little bit here. So I just want to say to you, if you know where we're coming from with this already, thanks for being a part of the ride. I think you'll enjoy this episode. If you're a little confused about why we're not necessarily going to be talking about this in a positive light, I'd just encourage you to keep an open mind to this and be willing to listen to other people's stories, because even though it may not have been your experience, does not mean it is invalid. And I think the more we hear from other people's experiences, we'll see that quite a few people, in fact, I'd say the majority of women in churches, don't like Mother's Day services. I was kind of surprised with how much negativity I heard about this, but we'll get into all that. So I just want to start off and ask both of you what your initial experience with church background is. Jen has been on the podcast a couple of times, but just that way people know a little bit where you're coming from. Like, what kind of church did you grow up in? We'll get to the Mother's Day stuff in a minute. And what was your involvement in them?
So I grew up in the independent fundamental Baptist church circles, and my family moved churches several times growing up. I think I was in at least 3 churches during my early childhood into, through 18 kind of thing. And then when I was an adult, we were in, well, we moved churches 3 more times for just various reasons, some good, some bad. And yeah, just stayed in the really fundamental circles for quite a while. And then when I got married, we went to a not as fundamental church. Honestly, it was probably one of the least fundamental churches that I'd been in, but it was culturally, yeah.
Doctrinally, it was still very fundamentalist.
Yeah, but not as bad as the
Not
other churches.
no.
Yeah.
Okay, so I grew up in the Catholic Church. So we went to church on a regular basis in my childhood, but then there came a time, and I don't remember how old I was, where we just started going on Christmas and Easter. And then through my late teenage years into my early 20s, I stopped going to church until I had Colin, and I wanted him to be raised in a church. So I started looking around, and it was shortly after Colin was born, I became a born-again evangelical Christian and started going to a Baptist church, and then relocated after about a year, I would say, to another Baptist church that was fundamental. And it was there that we stayed for over 20 years. And yeah, that's my story.
And both of you have some experience on the backside of church as well. Janna, you did a tiny bit of secretarial work. It was like an internship thing, right? It was like a summer, basically.
Yeah.
And you were secretary at the church for, what was it, about 4 years?
3 or 4 years.
Okay, yeah. And I did several internships at church. I went to pastors' conferences, did a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. So we're not just speaking as people who had sat in the pews. Like, we have dealt with people behind the scenes. We hear the stories behind the scenes, the not so rosy picture that gets painted. So this is even more than just our opinions on this. This is from stuff that we've seen behind the scenes on it as well. So going off of that then, what do either of you remember about Mother's Day services in church, either growing up or as an adult? Are there any positive memories of it? Do you remember, were there bad sermons? Was it encouraging? Were there cheesy handouts, luncheons? What's your memories of Mother's Day in church?
So obviously I've been in several churches, and each one is very different in what they do. And, I remember the one church we were in, they always did like a mother and daughter brunch. And it was usually, I believe it was on a Saturday. So like my mom, my grandma, and then my aunt would, we'd all go to that. And since it was on a Saturday, my aunt would be able to go. And I really don't remember any of the service, like the sermons, because a lot of times I'm like, well, this is for a mother, and I'm not a mother. I don't really need to pay attention to this. I do remember that the handouts were something along the lines of like a potted flower, a mug. I know hand soap has been done before.
Especially post-COVID now. It used to be
Right.
flowers, now it's hand soap. sanitizer.
Right. I think one year my mom got like a gardening thing. She got like little gloves and a little like pink rake kind of thing.
Here's a hoe, mother.
Okay, just core memory unlocked. I do remember that there was one time that they gave us a flashlight, and
Wait,
this
what?
was not, hold on, this was not just any flashlight. This
What's
had
the story behind it?
a,
Oh, hold on. I want to guess. Oh, guess. Is this something related to like being the light of the world? Or Sonnet or something?
there may have been, but that's not where I was
Oh,
going.
okay. All right.
No. This flashlight was a hand crank flashlight. So it didn't need batteries. You just cranked it, and it was pink. And my mom, I think she kept it in her purse.
You never know.
Right, yeah. So yeah, that's about all I can remember.
Do you remember anything of like what kind of flower there was? Because I know some churches would do like a rose or a carnation, or I think some would even do a tulip. That was more Easter, I guess. But
No, it was just some kind of like potted flower, just a generic,
yeah,
you think of a flower, that's how it looked basically.
I love that the best way the one church could figure out to honor moms was by making them get up early for a breakfast on a Saturday, as well as get up early on church on Sunday.
Because we love that.
Right.
Well, I think the brunch was at like 10 or 11. So I mean, I guess
So,
it's
especially if they have young kids.
still kind of early.
Another day.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Catholic church for about 18, 20 years. So yeah,
Yes.
what was that like? I'm curious.
No
Did they do
different.
anything?
No, not that I recall. It was a regular service, and then we would stop and get a bagel and cream cheese on the way home.
Good Jersey girl.
Yeah, but no, I think in my experience, the hokey Mother's Day things was reserved for the fundamental churches.
Well, what'd you experience with it?
Well, as I recall, our church would do a mother-daughter breakfast, and I never went. I went to that church, well, until later years.
And let's say with that too, I was an only child, so you didn't have a daughter,
I didn't have a daughter.
and your mom is still Catholic. She's not coming to a Baptist church.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the way they phrased it, I never felt welcome.
Mm.
Although on the other side of it, people would always say, "Oh, just come anyway. You're a daughter." But it was uncomfortable for me. I did go to a couple at the end as we were dwindling off and doing them. I think I had spoken at one of them, but we too would do silly. I say silly gifts. I like practical things and not things that I'm going to take home and donate.
Some women don't want flowers; they want Wawa gift cards.
I distinctly remember a prayer journal,
Yeah.
which I don't like journals that are all laid out for me.
It's only the 50th prayer journal from that year anyway,
We did get hand sanitizer.
which is practical. I'll
It
just
is
give you that.
practical. I remember pen and a notebook. So
Was the hand sanitizer spiritualized? This is about keeping like a clean heart before God.
yes, it was.
Wait, what? No, I'm joking.
It was spiritualized with a poem
No.
of some sort. One year it was about peach something.
Yes.
Do you remember?
Yes, that was very poor planning. The Mother's Day.
Yeah, that was the one with the hand soaps I was talking about.
Yep,
Yeah.
it all revolved around peach, which this is a relatively family-friendly show, but and we also talk about the R-rated parts of the Bible, so don't think too hard about that one. I am curious though about your speaking there, because this was something where they would have a lady speak to the ladies.
Yes. I I don't remember exactly. I had spoken a few times at different functions. I seem to remember that particular one was about how we speak our
Oh,
words.
okay.
So how we can use our words to encourage one another and things like that.
The only power women have in the church, right? That's the word. Yeah.
No, you're kind of joking, but it's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I'm just being serious.
Yeah.
That's exactly how it's treated.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you remember what your, it wouldn't be a sermon since it was to women. Was it a message? Was it, we
was
never
a
said
lesson.
homily. It was a lesson.
It was a lesson.
So, yeah.
Yes, the women taught lessons.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
What lesson did you teach the women?
Oh, just if I remember correctly, it was how to build up one another with and not only one another, but our husbands, of course.
Oh, yes.
So we need to build them up no matter what.
Yeah.
Never
Together.
tear them down.
Stroke the ego.
Yes.
So, yeah, in case you can't tell from this, none of us here are still in fundamental churches. We've left that mindset, and so that's not just me here on the podcast. That's my parents are in that boat as well. So I think it's time now that we move on to hearing from some other women's opinions on Mother's Day services. Ready for that?
Let's do it.
I'm a part of a couple of different groups on Facebook. I guess you could call them like deconstruction groups. And they're usually people sharing stories from their time in church. Some positive stuff, some about transitioning out of one faith community into another, or just through their faith journey as a whole. And so there's a couple in particular that have a lot of these stories, and when I knew we were going to be doing a Mother's Day episode, I figured this was a gold mine for content, because these groups are not just former Baptists or fundamentalists. These are people from all over, and I don't think either of the groups has anyone that I have actually met in person. These are just online friends that I have. So, it's not just like biased, all these stories are coming from one church. No, there are Baptists, there are Methodists, there are Pentecostal, Catholics in these groups. So a wide variety from all across the country and even around the world. And they've shared some stories. So I reached out in both of those groups and I asked for stories of Mother's Day experiences in church. Sermons, the handouts, the luncheons, all of that, what was it like for you? And I was expecting maybe like a dozen responses or so. I guess 75 comments from these groups. So Christian women feel very strongly about Mother's Day services in church. And I just wanted to give voice to some of these. I asked right up front in my question, I said, if you share these stories, do you mind if I share them in the podcast? They'll be anonymous. And so, we have like 75 comments from these people, and we're not going to read all 75 by any stretch. But I do want to read through several of these, because it's easy for us to hear of a few negative experiences and say, oh, well, that's just a bad church. Our church is better. We're not like that. Those were just some people who ended up in a really bad situation. And that works as an answer only for so long, until you start hearing more and more and more of these stories. And eventually you go, okay, maybe it's actually flipped. Maybe if I had a good experience, I'm the exception, not the rule. So again, even if you have had positive Mother's Day experiences in church or neutral, maybe you're just a guy listening to this and you're like, what's the big deal? This is the big deal. I just want us to be able to sit back and listen to what these women are sharing. And I'll put up here a little bit of a content warning for it as well, because there is some discussion of not necessarily like physical abuse, but a lot of emotional abuse. There's a little bit of discussion of abortion, teen pregnancies, things like that. So if this is a section that is a little touchy for you, feel free to skip ahead. We'll put the time signatures in the notes for this, but it's just to go through some of the stories that people shared here. First one, and I asked mainly for women's stories in this too. I want to be able to give the main voice to that. If we're talking about a minority issue, we should have a minority speaking about it. We don't just need more white guys on podcasts talking about what they think of stuff. So I wanted to get not only women's perspectives, but mostly give them the forefront here. So I'm going to read through some of these, and feel free, both of you, jump in, comment, give any thoughts you have on this, interrupt me as we go through here. So the first one says, I think Mother's Day is incredibly difficult for a lot of people, including people who are mothers. My experience of it being acknowledged in church is being aimed very much at the traditional family setup, alienating those for whom this isn't their reality. I'm a widowed parent, and I avoid Mothering Sunday at church for this reason. It's generally a pretty raw experience and a reminder that life hasn't gone quite to plan, compounded by the fact that I will invariably have to make my own breakfast and will go home to cook lunch and do the dishwashing. I feel for men who have always wanted children but have never met anyone too. That was a very interesting side of it. Yeah, I had never thought of that, like the single guys who want to be a parent. They want to have a wife who's a mother, and that could be a rough day. Like, I thought that was really nice that she was thinking from the other side of that there. I had never considered that. She says, all in all, it's a sensitive area for many, and one that might be best observed by individuals in their own time if desired. This one was interesting. This isn't about church, but they said all the nicer restaurants in our area were super crowded on Mother's Day because it was the one day people felt bad having moms cook. I still appreciated that, though, because if you're going to church and then you're going to go out to lunch, it's going to be a little bit later because you're probably getting out of church like 12 o'clock. People are already at the restaurant. And especially if they have younger kids, now you're trying to do something nice for mom, but you gave her an hour of waiting with screaming kids. Potential of getting the meal wrong, a bunch of loud people all around. Like,
It's not a celebration with mom in mind.
right. No, it's a nice idea, but it doesn't execute well. This came from a guy, but I thought this was interesting. She says, our child's preschool, which we love, by the way, always celebrates Mother's Day during the day, and dads get a night out. While this covers most families, I'm the stay-at-home parent, and my wife works during the day, so she either can't attend or takes a personal day. We're definitely a minority case, but not completely alone. So that was interesting. Like, you're always going to leave someone out
Right.
on it. A little untraditional there with the dad staying at home, and like churches don't think of that.
Well, something as simple as mother-daughter, how
Mhm.
they title things, you would leave people out.
Yep.
You know, that's a smaller issue than that, but
Now let's look at the flip side of that, where it goes from excluding people to including too much. This is what another woman on here said. She says, as a single woman who is not a mom, I've mostly stopped attending church on Mother's Day, unless I have to be there. This year I might need to for performance purposes. Done well, it turns into Women's Day, which already exists on March 9th. It's hard for there to be a good way to deal with it in church, aside from a brief mention. I love my mom and I'm happy to celebrate her, but I'm not usually with her on Mother's Day because her birthday is just the week before. I think it's difficult to encompass every experience of Mother's Day we will find in church. And before we comment on that, let me jump on what another guy here said. He said, I have experienced a great deal of awkwardness and discomfort during services on Mother's Day and Father's Day too. Wanting to recognize mothers is noble, but the desire to avoid anyone feeling left out sometimes leads to recognizing all the women, at which point it's not about recognizing mothers anymore.
yes.
Right? Did either of you experience that in church?
Maybe I don't remember exactly. Maybe in one of the churches we went to, I was going to say college, but Mother's Day is usually when we get out of school.
Yeah, we would have been finishing up. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe once, but
I remember this from when we would have the mother-daughter banquets, and it would be advertised as this, well, just, if you're a mom, come. If you have a mom, come. And it's like, well, that's literally everybody alive, but they don't mean the men. They don't want any guys there. So all of the females is what they're saying.
It became a ladies' breakfast.
Which is totally fine if a church wants to do a ladies' breakfast, but that's not Mother's Day.
Right. Yeah.
And you take away from celebrating that when you make it about everyone, when you're trying not to leave people out. This is the catch-22 of Mother's Day or Father's Day kind of thing. You are making people feel left out. And if you try to include all of them, it's no longer the original thing.
right. And especially like when you have mothers stand up in church, a lot of them don't want to stand up.
Oh, we've got some stories of that coming up. Yeah.
And then when they do stand up, you have, the women in the church who, maybe they want children, but they just for whatever reason can't. And, they're just awkwardly sitting there like, wow, I wish I could stand up, but I can't kind of thing. And that just is uncomfortable for everyone.
There's a lot of that on its way here. One lady says, when I was 8 years old, our pastor preached an hour-long Mother's Day sermon about how the church is our mother. So if we love God our Father, we will submit to the church. Now that one's definitely a different experience for me. Because growing up Baptist, you would never say the church is our mother. That's way too Catholic sounding. But, oh man, talk about finding a way to exert some authority over your church members, right?
They indirectly gave the same message because you needed to, listen to the authority of the church.
Right.
But not necessarily saying it that way.
Right. It's just a great excuse for it, is to call the church your mother.
Right. Wow.
Woof. Here's what it says. I didn't get married until my mid-30s, and even if I would have, I have health issues that would make it very unlikely I'd ever have children. Sitting in an IFB church on Mother's Day, that's Independent Fundamental Baptist, every year was discouraging, devaluing, and emotionally exhausting.
Mother's Day is really not about the women. It's just about stroking the male ego and making them feel, oh, we've honored the women, so we're good.
Right, and basically in just about any church that's going to celebrate Mother's Day, what's the sex of the person speaking? It's going to be a guy, because they're not going to let a woman preach. They wouldn't even let a woman pray or give a benediction for the service. So,
I mean, the most you're going to do is having the pastor's wife probably give a little devotional at the mother and daughter brunch that they
right, it's not going to be in
might
front of the
do.
whole church. You can't
No.
have the guys there. So, yeah, it is 100% all done from the male perspective.
Mhm.
When you were secretary, did you have any input on what the Mother's Day stuff was? Were you asked about that? Or was that just like the male staff members said what the service was going to be?
Mostly the males ordered the service.
Yeah.
I might have been allowed to look in a catalog for what the gifts could be.
For the little gift.
But yeah, but as far as ordering the service, no, I had nothing to do with that.
Yeah. Here's where this story starts to get me really riled up. I try to stay pretty even keeled on this podcast, but if you want to make me mad, talk about mistreating children and young adults, teenagers, and the way that church is used to hurt them instead of help them, this is rough. This lady, still the same story, says, my dad was the pastor, and he always made it a point to let women know that unless they were mothers or actively trying to become mothers, they were not living out the only purpose they were created for. Now, come on, this is your own daughter. I'm guessing you know she has some physical issue. I mean, I guess it's possible they didn't, but
Whether he did or not, that's a horrible thing to say.
right. But and even more so, like if he knew this could potentially be an issue for his daughter, like how much of an a-hole do you have to be
Right.
to say that sort of thing? Good people can believe bad things.
Mhm.
We're all a testament of that, having been in a fundamentalist style church. Like good people can believe bad things. And I deal a lot with people our age who are deconstructing or shifting some beliefs, going to a different denomination or a different tradition or leaving church altogether. And a lot of times the parents aren't very accepting of it because they're still in very uptight circles. And I kind of hate to say it, but I tell people like there's kind of two ways it can go. If they are good people, they will accept you no matter what. They might not agree with you. They may never even change their beliefs, but they'll say our relationship with you is more important than our shoving this down your throat.
Mhm.
And they can even say, we disagree, we're not going to change, but you're still welcome. If they are unwilling to do that and they dig their heels in and they still try to change you, I hate to make a value judgment about someone I don't know, but that to me is when you cross the line from being a good person who believes bad things to just being a bad person.
Mhm.
You have let those doctrines corrupt you to the point that now you are bad.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, I've seen both with my friends and their parents. I've seen some who go, all right, we don't necessarily agree, but we still love you. You're still our kid. And then others that are just like, they dig their heels in and make war.
Mhm.
And that's, to me, that's the line between a good person and a bad person. And again, I don't want to make value judgments about people I don't know, but this story does not go a good way. She continues to say, it's not easy feeling like God made me in such a way that I can't possibly do the only thing that gives me value in his eyes. On my way out of the IFB, I brought it up to my dad how hurtful that mindset is, and I was told that I have a bad attitude and my thought life is terrible. Holy crap.
Yikes.
I don't know if there is any chance you are listening to this. If you are, I am so sorry. You deserve so much better than that. You do not ever deserve to be treated that way. That's just horrible.
A lot of times, too, in my experience, when they dig their heels in because they don't agree with something maybe their child has done, a direction they're going in, it's because they're more concerned about how it's going to reflect on them
Mm-hmm.
and, their reputation as opposed to their relationship with that family member. So they're being selfish.
Oh, that's even worse. See, I was thinking of the people who come at from a doctrinal side if they believe this is truly right.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. There is absolutely some parents who do this about, do you not see how that's going to reflect on me, on the family name? Oh, that's just straight up. I want to say wicked. That's
How are the people in church going to look at me? They're going to think I was a horrible parent because you're not following in my
Yep.
footsteps.
Yep.
Hmm.
This is totally about you. Like, that's what kids are about, right? Make mini-me's.
Right.
It was interesting. This lady continued saying, I was never a person who was desperate to have kids, which is what you said there. Never played with dolls. I hated working in the nursery. Those kinds of messages made me feel defective on every level. Somebody else said, we struggled with infertility for almost 3 years, and when they talked about the blessing of motherhood and how it's a calling to be a mom, it hurt so bad. It was hard to hear all of that while we wanted so desperately to be parents. I still get uneasy around Mother's Day in churches, even with my son being 2 years old now.
It's so funny because you hear the church is a hospital. We're here to help the hurting, and really they're the ones inflicting the hurt.
Yes.
Hmm.
So one of the things that I've really come to realize through a lot of this is that there are so many people for whom the Bible and church is a source of hurt instead of healing.
Mhm.
I can't tell you how many people I know in fundamentalist churches, usually women, some men as well, but usually women, who have panic attacks at church. I don't think that's a coincidence. And I would love to see a study sometime. I have yet to be able to find one. And if someone hasn't done it, I need to do it. But I honestly believe that there is a higher percentage of anxiety, panic attacks, depression within the church, and specifically evangelical and fundamental churches, than in any other demographics. It makes sense. You're being told every week what a crappy person you are. So like it's going to eventually have an effect on you.
And it does.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, this is something where these people don't seem to realize you get two choices. When you are confronted with the reality that your belief is hurting someone else, you have two choices. You either dig your heels in or you reconsider. The people who are willing to reconsider are good people. Good people can believe bad things. The ones who dig their heels in, I think, have crossed the line into being bad. Because there's two ways you can look at the Bible. Either the Bible heals, and you're saying it hurts, so maybe I'm misunderstanding the Bible. Or the Bible's supposed to heal, and you're saying it hurts, so the problem is with you. Victim blaming.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what most pastors, I probably shouldn't say that, but I will, most pastors in evangelical and fundamental circles will do, is they're unwilling to say maybe the problem is with how I present it. If someone comes and says, hey, that hurt, that made me feel excluded, that made me feel so, the problem's never with me. It's, oh, well, the problem's with you. And I'm a guy. I grew up having no problem with Mother's Day services. I didn't think it was an issue. I worked in kids ministry most of the time, which is a whole other story in and of itself. But, I didn't think negatively of Mother's Day until I started hearing women tell me some of these negative stories. And I'm like, whoa, what did we miss? How did we miss this? Well, because men are making up women's tribute services. How could that go wrong? Let's have a Juneteenth celebration thrown by a bunch of white guys. Like, what can go wrong with this, right? Let's have a bunch of Christians celebrate Hanukkah party together. But we don't think it through. So if the Bible is hurting, you have to decide, am I going to assume the problem is with my interpretation of the Bible, or is the problem actually you? And that's going to say a lot about who you are as a person. Man, this one is quite a story here. As someone who is single, never married, in my 40s, and will obviously never have children now, Mother's Day at church is incredibly painful. On one level, because I desperately wish I was a mother, but then piled onto that is the fact that my pain doesn't count and is apparently selfish. Single people are rarely mentioned in the prayers or the "we know Mother's Day is hard for some people" posts. I have been outright told I have no idea what it is to desperately want children until I'm married and dealing with infertility. Okay, that one ticks me off, because the people dealing with infertility are already on the fringes of church. They are already being mistreated by church, and she is saying that group then turned around and started mistreating her because of it. People, the answer to your hurt is not to hurt somebody else.
Right.
Oh, that one really bugged me. Anytime I discuss any of this, I'm told to suck it up and celebrate Mother's Day because mothers have a much harder life than me, and I'm usually ignored. I stay away from church on Mother's Day because that's what I need to do to protect myself, but that's apparently selfish.
Do you know that people in the church would give me a hard time for only having one child?
Oh, do tell.
Yeah, because of the quiverful movement
Yeah.
that you're supposed to have as many children as God will give you. But that just was not our circumstance. You know, obviously seeing that you're only child, I was often made to feel that I was not a good enough mom
Hmm.
because I didn't have more children. Like I didn't qualify as a mom having only one child.
That is horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And for anyone who may not know, because we do have a wide listenership, the quiverful movement that she referenced is a very fringe, niche, extreme right-wing cult group. It is absolutely the Duggars, if you're familiar with them, like the 21 Kids and Counting, Bill Gothard, even Mike and Debbie Pearl, if anyone knows those names there. And again, I want to emphasize this is fringe, because if you grew up in a fundamentalist style church, you might think this is normal. This is not normal. This is really fringe Christian stuff that takes one verse out of, I think it's a psalm. It might be in Proverbs, but I'm pretty sure it's in one of the psalms that talks about children being like arrows in the hands of a man, and happy is the man who has his quiver full of them, hence the quiverful movement. That is a whole other issue that I want to do a podcast on in the future, because that is a messed up movement. And essentially just the whole idea around it is have as many kids as you possibly can, because we need to take over the world for God, so we're creating this little army of child soldiers for God. And while the church we were in, I'm not speaking for Janna here, I think some of the ones you were in were probably closer to quiverful movement stuff.
Yeah.
The one that we were in, it wasn't like obviously taught, but there were a lot of families that had over 5 kids.
I mean, and the verses were read from scripture,
Yep.
and, you know, so it was glazed over.
Yep.
But yes, we did have larger families, and I have found that I came to a point where I had to defend myself, that having one child still made me a mom. One child makes you a mom, but it's terrible that you have to feel that way in a church of all places.
Yeah, I'm going to get riled up about this in a minute, because we have some stories of some ladies who came from quiverful families in here, and the way that they were treated in it. Again, you want to get me riled up, mistreat children because of church. And I am not, honestly, I don't give a crap how many kids you have. Like, that is not my job to tell you how many kids to have.
Your business.
But, you know, the average family, 2 or 3 kids. I would say 4 is still average. Yeah, I'm not trying to shame anyone here, but once I start seeing 5 or more kids, I think my first thought is, you're in a fundamental church, aren't you? That is always my first thought when I see a lot of kids. You know, it's something where it's not like an obviously Amish, but I mean, they're fundamentalists too. So again, you know, if you're someone and you wanted to have a lot of kids, that's no problem. But if you're doing this because you got pressured in because of church or something like that, that's not the way to go. But yeah, we'll get to some more of that in a minute here. This person says, I found the handing out of the flowers really hard. The poor kids doing it never knew whether to give me one or not. I don't like getting one because it just rubs it in. People say things like, but you're like a second mother to the kids in the church, which is lovely, and I'm glad I can be that. But that's not what I want to be, especially on Mother's Day. I also don't want to not get a flower. Same thing with the sermons about mothers. I both have no problem with it, and I don't want to hear it. So to avoid all the confusion and my own pain, I stay home. I'm sorry if that seems I'm unsupportive of mothers. I'm really not. And any other day of the year, I'll be your left hand. I just need that day. I suggest that when pastors are praying for people, that they try to remember the single people too. Oh, here, this is a rough one. We're going to get a little fiery on this. This is going to be a rabbit hole, people. This is going to be a rabbit hole.
Get your wind-up flashlight.
Man, on a Mother's Day episode, I almost just said we're going to kill that rabbit. That is... Okay, anyone who grew up after the 70s they're not going to get that anyway. When I was 14, we went to a Southern Baptist church that handed out single flowers. The sweet old man that was always a greeter would hand one to each woman and say, for the mother. So far, not too bad. And here's where it goes downhill. Then he'd hand one to each girl and say, for the future mothers. Now, folks, you can't see the reactions here, but those were pretty good eye rolls from both sides I've got going on here. She says, I remember thinking that we might not all become mothers. Now, as an adult, I think it's a lot creepier to be telling girls of all ages that their purpose is to become a mother. And she says, you ready for the kicker? The guy had never married and had no children.
Oof.
All right. I'm sorry, but I have to rabbit hole. Why does every evangelical fundamental church have that one creepy door greeter? He was never appointed by the church. He is self-appointed.
Someone in mind, I'm sure you do.
We all have people in mind. And all the people listening have people in mind too. But every single church has that one old guy. He's always over 60, and he always greets people at the door, and he is always creepy toward the women. And especially the young ones. And I'm not talking like not like physical touch or anything, but the things that they say
Makes you uncomfortable.
yes. And it's just so awful because most of like this lady said, they are sweet people. Like there's not a malicious bone in their body. They're not trying to be creepy. But when you step back, it is weird. Like when we were at our last church, Janna would sometimes work in the nursery.
I was gonna tell this story.
And now, let's be honest, you didn't work in the nursery because you liked kids. You worked in the nursery because you wanted to get out listening to the sermon.
I like kids, and
Right, but it was to get out of service.
I mean, yeah.
Which, let's just say, that is why your nursery workers work in nursery. Pastors, it is to stop hearing your crappy sermons. Am I wrong? Like, I remember
Maybe
when...
for some, but not all. Because there were some women who'd be like, "Oh, I'm gonna turn up the TV so I can hear the message."
actually
And I'm
on
like,
TV.
"No, turn it down. I don't want to hear this."
Escaping.
Well, that was the thing. Like when our church had stopped just having like a couple of women doing nursery, and they started doing a rotation, it was billed as this. Oh, we don't want them to get burned out. We want them to be able to, be refreshed, get some new blood in there. And part of it's security too. You don't want to give someone time to groom kids and that. Like you want to change up the people in there. But in all honesty, the reason that has changed is because the pastor wants those people hearing the sermon. I was in
meetings.
Yes,
Yeah.
we were both in meetings. We hear the backside of this. It was literally a reason was that so these people could hear the pastor's little lecture for the week. That's why. But yeah, Janna.
Yeah. So when I worked in the nursery, this man would come down, and mind you, he was married, but they never had kids. It did not matter who was working in there, and usually I was holding a kid or doing something, because they're young, they're little. And like, oh, I could see you with 2 or 3 babies, kind of thing, and it was just so creepy. And then
It's worth knowing too that at least as of this point, Janna and I don't have any kids, and that's not something that you had ever like talked about. You weren't constantly talking about kids or something in the church. Yeah, like,
no.
that's what I'm saying. So it'd be one thing if it was like a girl that you really knew, oh, she's a mom already, or she's going to try to be a mom really soon or something, but it was just randomly brought up to you.
Yeah, it was randomly brought up. Like I never talked about, oh, I want X amount of kids or anything like that. And then if there was another, usually there's another woman in the nursery, and he'd be like, oh, are you gonna have another kid? And this is a woman who already has like 4 children and is like, I think I'm good. And one day I told her, I was like, you cannot come down here and say these things to women, because I'm like, if a woman has having
Good for you.
I did. I got tired of it.
You get to say it.
Yeah, and I was like, you cannot say that, because what if someone is having fertility? Oh, well, we never had kids. I'm like, that doesn't make it right that you're coming down here and saying that. Like, you of all people should know how much statements like that hurt, but it did not connect, apparently.
No, I know he was just joking, because he would actually come around and do the other side of it for me, but it was still just as creepy or weird. Like if Janna was in nursery or holding a little kid, heck, a mother with a little kid could walk by, and he would look at me and go, you gotta keep those little kids away from the women, or they're gonna want one. I'm sorry, this is Dwight Schrute logic about all the women in the office syncing up their periods. Like, this is not how this works.
If I see a child, I'm good. In fact, most of the time I'm like, I'm so glad I don't have one, with the screaming and the snotty noses.
Was that the greeter you were talking about? It's just stuff like that where I know you mean well, but think. And honestly, if you're over the age of 50, start running the things you say by people under the age of 20 and just see how they respond. Pastors, run your sermons by a 20-year-old and see if there's anything they snicker at, right? You know, just stuff like this. Like, start thinking outside your little bubble.
I mean, I will say it does depend on the 20-year-old, because if it's someone who has,
Yeah, super
font
sheltered.
to,
Yeah.
they're not gonna, it's not gonna occur to them.
Find someone like me with a messed up mind.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, here's some more of the stories we found. This woman says, I despise Mother's Day. I'm a mother and a good one. Which, hey, props to you for recognizing that. Yeah, no, like I'm being serious. Like if a guy said I'm an amazing carpenter, you'd be like, oh yeah, he's an amazing carpenter. But if a woman says, man, I'm a really good mother, you're like, why are you so prideful? You like, you know,
You don't hear that.
right? No, so no, I will totally take your word for that. And yeah, good for you. I'm a mother and a good one, but I had a very strained, fractured relationship with my own mother. I remember when I was newly married attending a mother-daughter banquet. I went alone and sat with some other women. We had to sing some song like Mother Dear, I just want to be like you. No, a feral animal would have been better than what I had for a mother. It's like motherhood and mothers are angels, saints, and everything else, but there are a lot of bad mothers out there. I never attend any mother-daughter events. The other thing I notice is that on Mother's Day, mothers are held up and praised, but on Father's Day, it's men you need to step up, and they're scolded. Now, I want to pause on that for a second, because I'm seeing a couple of different reactions here. Have you seen a similarity on Father's Day, or do they get different treatment, do you think?
I don't recall fathers getting a different treatment, but I do remember mothers being told on Father's Day that even though this is a Father's Day message, you should still get something out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah.
Which wasn't usually said to the fathers on Mother's Day.
Exactly. But I don't recall fathers being treated differently.
That's relatively familiar to me, is oh man, we need to be men of God and leading our families and stuff. But I mean, again, same thing with the Mother's Day messages. I really don't remember the Father's Day messages. In fact, little tidbit about me, my dad was not at most Father's Day messages, because when I was 11, he declared that he was an atheist. So yeah, Father's Days were honestly a little bit awkward for us, because it's like, oh, well, our dad doesn't come to church. And, we just bring him home whatever little trinket they were giving away.
I will say, coming at this from a guy, I 100% resonate with what she said there.
Mhm.
I can back that up completely. I honestly don't think mothers are really praised that much on Mother's Day either in church. Evangelical churches are horrible at praising people, unless they are on paid staff. Well, men on paid staff.
Because we're all horrible people, so
Exactly.
and we're already naturally prideful with big egos, so you gotta be knocked down a couple notches.
So especially when we talk about like some Bible stuff related to this, it would be used in such a way to basically tell women, this is what you need to be, and we're holding up this impossible standard. People all the time talk about like the Barbie girl or the Victoria's Secret girl or the model or something like that's unrealistic expectations for women. You know what's an unrealistic expectation for women is what churches tell them they should be.
It's exhausting.
You'd be easier getting the bikini body than the Proverbs 31
Right.
lifestyle.
Right.
Which we will absolutely be getting to before the end of this episode. So for women, it was kind of almost like a backhanded compliment of like, here's what you should be. We're gonna like say you're like this kind of woman. For the fathers, it was just like an all-out face slap of you need to show up more, stop being passive, come to church more, stop drinking, stop cursing, stop smoking, because that's the stuff that only men can do apparently. Yeah, like be nicer to your wife, talk to them, be there for your kids.
Well, because with the average family in the church, give or take, there were some who this was not the norm, but for a lot of them, the woman was really the one who was the spiritual leader, even though the pastor said, well, men, you need to be the spiritual leader. And,
That's true.
there may be a few, goody two-shoe families where the man is this quote-unquote spiritual leader, but for most of them, it's very obviously the woman who's dragging everyone to church.
And honestly, the ones where the father is a true spiritual leader are the worst ones.
Right.
Those
Yeah.
are like the borderline abusive,
Yeah.
fringe cult ones. When the dad actually takes that message to heart, it is dangerous.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to read a few more of these. All mothers, please stand so we can recognize you. I haven't been able to have children, so that is really painful. We have a gift for all mothers. So now I'm in a place where I don't have a relationship with my own mother, so it's just awful all around. Someone said I second that as an infertile person whose mom passed away several years ago.
I wonder, why do they even have Mother's Day celebrations in the church?
Because men are finding ways to honor women instead of listening to women.
We probably should have looked it up before the podcast, but the history of Mother's Day, you were saying it's to make people feel better about how they're treating a mom on Mother's Day. I always saw it as a money-making holiday.
Right.
You know, that and Father's Day.
I'm talking as a cynic from the psychological point of view.
Right.
Yeah. Pragmatically, yes.
Yeah, I just don't even understand why, if it's causing this much hurt, why do they even do it?
Well,
Because how many pastors are stopping and asking the women in their church, hey, do you actually like Mother's Day? Is this actually something that's helping?
well, honestly, it's just human. Remember the Spider-Man thing? I think this might have been Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, so people might not remember it as well. But the whole thing about the aunt's meatloaf, and Uncle Ben actually hated the meatloaf, but she kept making it the whole time because she thought that he loved it. Like, that is just the human condition. We keep doing these things because we think, oh, that's what the person likes. And you don't want to hurt their feelings, so you never speak up and are like, oh, I don't like meatloaf. So for years, you just build resentment against each other. The wife makes the meatloaf and is upset that the husband doesn't seem to like it. The husband's upset that she keeps making something he doesn't like. It's like, if one of you would just step up and say, I'm feeling a little hurt here, and you both are honest, you can make a meal they like. But we all do this, and this is what churches are doing. They're saying, we love women, we appreciate women, here's how we show it. But they didn't ask women if that's how they wanted to be shown love.
Show it on Sundays, or, you know, when you speak to us, or...
Right. How much money? Probably not a lot, because the trinkets were usually pretty crappy. But, a decent amount of money goes into these gifts if you have more than 10 people in your church. Pastors, you could have saved yourself hundreds of dollars if you took the 5 minutes it took me to put these 2 posts up in a Facebook group and ask for what women actually thought of this. I did this in 5 minutes. You have wasted years hurting the majority of the women in your church. And some of you here are going, oh, well, that's not our church. If your church does a Mother's Day service, it is your church. Yes.
You have hurting women.
Yes, absolutely. And if some people seem not to show up on particular days, there's probably a reason. And honestly, you're that reason. I don't want to be mean on this podcast, but I hold pastors to a very high standard because I trained to be one. And I know what they go through. I know how they are trained. I know how they are taught. I know the behind the scenes stuff. This is not hard. Again, this was 5 minutes. That's all you needed to do. But so many of them, the heads are up their own butts, and they're going to do it their way. I'm going to show you I love you no matter whether you like it or not. Here's a perspective on it that we haven't heard yet. This is from a daughter of an abusive mother. She says, Mother's Day was always one of the worst days of the year for me and still is because of trauma. I would start the day being a disappointment because the card I chose didn't have the right sentiment, or the gift I made or brought was wrong or wasted resources. I always did something to quote-unquote ruin the day and make her cry and rage. Then we would get to church and she would be all smiles and graciousness and talk about how much she loved being a mother. Then I got to listen to people compliment her while telling me how grateful I should be to have such a wonderful mom and how hard I should work to die to myself and honor her because that is what pleased God. Then I got to watch her be honored in front of the church for being so committed. Meanwhile, she spent my whole childhood mentally, emotionally, and physically abusing me to the point I have constant suicidal ideation, severe anxiety, and PTSD.
Wish I could hug her.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I am so, again, I don't know if you're listening, but I am so sorry. You did not deserve that, and that is so wrong and wicked to do that to a child.
Break a child's spirit.
Yes.
Bring you something.
And then what's so sad is there's like 4 more comments off of this of people saying they have the same or similar stories.
I was going to say, more people in your church have abusive mothers than you realize.
Yeah. Somebody else said, what if instead of making a big to-do about mothers for one day out of the year, churches actually did something to address the exhaustion and overwhelm that so many women feel? What about instead of giving me a carnation, we talk about the resources so many of us desperately need to be able to care for families effectively, like comprehensive prenatal care, postpartum support, paid maternity leave, state-funded daycare, other supports that are provided in virtually every other post-industrialized country. To me, Mother's Day is about assuaging the guilt. I'm sorry, if you are a little politically conservative listening to this one, plug your ears for a second here. To me, Mother's Day is all about assuaging the guilt of a capitalist patriarchal society that runs on the unpaid labor of mothers. You're kind of right. When men are celebrated for their work, they get raises and promotions. When women are celebrated for their work, they get a flower and a few words one day out of the year. Somebody else says, you talk about how wonderful mothers are, but some of us didn't have wonderful mothers. Some of us had mentally ill people that gave birth to us. Getting pregnant while not being married and on Mother's Day is looked down upon. Somebody said, yeah, it's funny how raising a child is either a holy sacrificial blessing or a selfish secular cruelty, depending on whether you filed paperwork with your county clerk's office yet or not. Somebody else shared that they used to have women stand based on who was the oldest mother there, the youngest mother there. And then they had a 15-year-old stand up and stop doing that. Which then what message does that send to that girl?
Right.
That she's even less loved and important now that they stopped that after her.
Not an actual mother. You're
Right.
Yeah.
just a pregnant woman.
You're too young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not an actual mother because you only had one. You're not an the
Yes.
messages in the church are just
It's insane.
touching.
Yep. Someone else in here mentioned that in a Catholic or Anglican tradition, she's from the UK, she says it is a refreshment Sunday when we can come up for air mid-fasting in the period after Lent. People went to their main or mother's church, and it later became when servants got time off to go back home to visit family. It's interesting. She said, that said, the day still carries all the complications of mothers who have lost children. That's something I haven't brought up. Those who yearn for children that don't come, mourning the loss of their own mothers. And what about people who have had bad experiences with their mothers or who had great parental figures that weren't mothers? Like, what if you were raised by an aunt or a grandmother or, a godmother? So, what about that? Here's another one that says, my last service in my old IFB church before my husband and I officially left was a Mother's Day service. My mother-in-law is one of the sweetest, most genuine souls, and church family means everything to her, so we went for her. Church and family means everything for her. I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, I realize the pastor isn't even really using scripture at this point. Yep, that's an IFB church, all right. He just keeps talking about how much moms do, how they do everything for us, and the least we can do is say thank you. That's it. That was the message. No, here are 5 easy housekeeping tips, men. Not surprise the exhausted women in your life with literally being a functioning human being, all caps. Don't forget to say thank you. That was the message. I was so annoyed, and then out of freaking nowhere, any woman who gets an abortion is selfish, period, was said from the pulpit. No other commentary other than a lot of heavy male voices in response saying amen. On freaking Mother's Day, you're going to choose to throw a barb at women who just went through a really difficult process physically and mentally, who would possibly have come to your church to seek love and solace, and all they hear from you is they're selfish. My dad's routine Mother's Day sermon always included a story about a man on death row who bit off his mother's ear right before his execution.
That's helpful.
Yeah, let's talk about Hannibal Lecter in church. I was an unwed mother attending church before I deconstructed. I went to a Mother's Day banquet with my mom and daughter, and the amount of people who were confused that I didn't have a husband was baffling. People who had known me my whole life kept saying they didn't know I got married. Then when I told them I didn't, the stuttering, "Oh, well, that's okay, God doesn't judge," was the best reaction I could get.
Wow.
Yeah, that's great. This lady's a former Catholic. She says, Mother's Day Mass was always also First Communion. So imagine the front pews all taken up with the parish's 6-year-olds. Our priest, who was the Monsignor, was never appropriate on Mother's Day. One year, his homily was all about the graphic descriptions of abortions. One year, he only wanted to talk about the thousands of dollars he spent on surveillance equipment in order to capture the angels he believed were flying around the building on tape.
What?
Good to know it's not just Baptists who have whack job pastors. But the absolute worst was the year he felt compelled to discuss his special calling, ministering to sex offender priests. He felt he was particularly suited to ministering to them, held special retreats for them, and then later on we found out he assigned sex offender priests to most of the parishes in our town.
Love that.
Yeah.
And, it's one thing if that's like your random sermon, it's not great, but
Mother's Day.
Right.
Really?
Times.
Now here's a classic. My birthday is in May. When my mom was pregnant with me, she stayed home from church on Mother's Day and cried because she wasn't yet a mom, and then proceeded to tell me this story every year thereafter. Real helpful. I think the thing that bothers me the most about celebration at my current church is that mothers get flowers and plants and other crappy items, and they give out a Blackstone grill for fathers on Father's Day.
What church is
I was about to say, can we attend this? No, that's it was probably like a raffle or something, but still, that's
insane.
that's messed up. Yeah, this was a really interesting perspective that, as an only child, I had never considered. She said, I will say that as the oldest daughter, I did a lot to help raise my siblings, to the point where I often felt like the second mother, especially when my dad was out of town. The fact that our actual mother got all the credit on Mother's Day at church made me feel a little unfair at times. It was really interesting. I had never considered that.
But when you think of it, like the TV families that are big, the way that the moms are able to tend to the children is they use their older children to help raise the younger ones.
Yeah, parentification
Yes.
of children. Yeah.
Again, I'm not trying to shame anyone for the choices they made and how many kids they have, but it will get me fired up if kids don't have a childhood. Their job is not to be the answer to you're not buying a box of Durex. Like, let them be kids and either be more careful, get family involved with parenting, but don't do it with your own kids. This is another story of this. Or another person says, I was almost 9 when the first of my second family was born. It was a remarriage, and 4 months shy of 13 when the third was born. Everyone was all, how do you do it, to my mom about 5 kids and 3 under 5? But the reality is my older brother did nothing, and I was the second mom. I came home from school and was mom. I had 0 extracurriculars. I couldn't accept invitations without checking in to see if I had to babysit or help be in charge. I felt taken advantage of, and I knew it was wrong.
Wow.
Holy crap. Yes, that is wrong. That is awful. Somebody else, I was 9 and 10 when my brother and sister were born. I was homeschooled after 7th grade so I could be home with them while my parents worked. Homeschooling is a whole other discussion, but if that's why you're doing it,
yeah, it's not okay.
I'm sorry, that is just messed up. Yeah, she says, my parents never wanted me to get a job, learn to drive, or get a proper education in case it took me away from home and they lost their free childcare.
Grooming her for later years of being home and taking care of a family. Not being able to do anything else.
And we could just keep going on and on. I probably skipped about 20 stories there. But I want to say a big thank you to everyone who shared their stories on here. And again, they remain anonymous, but I really appreciate the time that you took to share those, your honesty, your openness. And I am sorry for all that you all have experienced in that. And for people listening as well, I am sure some of you have similar stories. And I can just say no one deserves to be treated in those ways. That is awful. And you deserve better. And it is completely okay, if you are still a church-going person, to avoid days like that. In fact, I would say it is right. I'd say, vote with your own choices, with your own body.
With your attendance.
Yes, exactly.
Or lack thereof.
Yes. Basically, for all these fundamentalist churches that want to boycott things, boycott church when it gets bad.
Right.
And see how long until something changes when the attendance starts dropping. And that won't do anything. What'll do it is when the giving starts dropping.
Yeah, it's all about the money.
Yeah.
But how smart, though, to think enough of yourself to protect yourself by not going to those services, because I never would have seen that as an option when I was in church. So I commend those people
100%
who don't go to protect themselves. So
yes,
I wish I would have.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, if you are listening to this, I realize this comes out on Mother's Day, but if you're listening to this and you're one of those people, feel free. Take care of yourself. God does not want you sitting somewhere that's hurting you when it's supposed to be helping. You are not the problem. If something that helps is something that's supposed to help is hurting, the problem isn't you. And you know what churches say and pastors say is, well, just keep going until it helps.
Mm.
You know, if you have to take a medication for something and it's making it worse, you stop taking the medication. You don't keep taking it until it makes you feel better. If it's making you feel worse, right? You switch medications or you get off of the medication completely. I think you all are smart enough to figure out that analogy and where that goes. So thank you again to everyone who shared. And if you relate to any of this, we stand with you. We support you in doing what you have to do for your own health and well-being. And if this is something that you've never thought of before, or if your experience was different from this, that's okay too. Not everyone has a bad experience, but just realize that your experience is not representative of everyone's, and no one experience is representative of everyone's. But the fact that we were able to bring so many here and hear all of this tells me there is a problem. And this is not just a Baptist problem. This isn't just a fundamentalist problem. This was across denominations, even across countries. So I don't know that we have any pastors listening to this, but pastors, you need to stop having these services. If you want to recognize mothers, I am okay with that. I really am. Like, if it's Mother's Day and you absolutely feel like you need to recognize mothers, I am okay with your saying, hey, today is Mother's Day. Guys, make sure you treat her right. And we just want to say to all the moms here, we love you. That's it. Don't do the special gifts. Don't make anyone stand. No flowers. And then you know what? Mention your solidarity with the people who don't fit in. If you want to do a prayer, a benediction, something like that, lift up in prayer the people who feel left out there. In studying for this, I came across what I think is a fantastic prayer / blessing that someone wrote for this. And so, like, if you feel you have to address Mother's Day, do something like this. Just read something like this. This was fantastic. It says, to those who gave birth this year to their first child, we celebrate with you. To those who lost a child this year, we mourn with you. To those who are in the trenches with little ones every day and wear the badge of food stains, we appreciate you. To those who experience loss through a miscarriage, failed adoptions, or running away, we mourn with you. To those who walk the hard path of infertility, fraught with pokes, prods, tears, and disappointment, we walk with you. Forgive us when we say foolish things. We don't mean to make this harder than it is. To those who are foster moms, mentor moms, and spiritual moms, we need you. To those who have warm and close relationships with your children, we celebrate with you. To those who have disappointment, heartache, and distance from your children, we sit with you. To those who lost their mothers this year, we grieve with you. To those who experienced abuse at the hands of their own mother, we acknowledge your experience. To those who lived through driving tests, medical tests, and the overall testing of motherhood, we are better for having you in our midst. To those who have aborted children, we remember them and you on this day. To those who are single and long to be married and mothering your own children, we mourn that life has not turned out the way you longed for it to be. To those who step-parent, we walk with you on those complex paths. To those who envisioned lavishing love on grandchildren, yet that dream is not to be, we grieve with you. To those who will have empty nests in the upcoming year, we grieve and rejoice with you. To those who place children up for adoption, we commend you for your selflessness and remember how you hold that child in your heart. And to those who are pregnant with new life, both expected and surprising, we anticipate with you. This Mother's Day, we walk with you. Mothering is not for the faint of heart, and we have real warriors in our midst. We remember you.
That's really nice.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
if I knew of a church that did that kind of thing on Mother's Day, man, things would be a lot different in my life.
Just go.
Yes. Yeah. Seriously. Oh, that is beautiful. And I will link to that in the show notes as well. So we say a hearty amen to that. And wherever you may fall on that spectrum or any listening to this, we thank you for listening in with us. And we have one more segment here that we have to do today. And that's because no Mother's Day church experience is complete without addressing the Bible passages. All right, ladies, what Bible passages did you hear on Mother's Day in church? What experiences you got with this?
Proverbs 31.
Yeah.
Yep,
So one.
that's the big one. Anything else you can think of?
Oh, yeah. Samuel.
Oh, yeah, his mom.
Yeah.
Was it Hannah, I think, prayed for Samuel and dedicated him to the Lord. Oh, that's a good one.
That just came to my mind.
I think I may remember hearing like Esther one time, maybe. But-
Yeah, maybe. Well,
it's strong.
it's a
in the
woman.
Bible. It's a woman
Yeah.
character.
They
Maybe.
were running out of Bruce.
Yeah, exactly.
I think maybe Ruth. I was gonna say I was looking back when I used to take notes during church services. I was trying to see if I had any on Mother's Day, and one I had. It was a man who was preaching, of course,
Of course.
and he was preaching about how to raise children
Hmm.
on Mother's Day, and then the evening service was about church unity.
See, that's what I mean about like, it's still a backhanded thing to moms. It's like, that's not praising a mom or anything. That's, let me tell you how to raise your kids.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, that was a very tasteless sermon to preach on Mother's Day of all things. And I will say he was not the pastor
Hmm.
for whatever reason. Well, it was Mother's Day, the pastor's.
Even he didn't want to hear the crappy Mother's Day sermons.
Yeah, but he chose the worst possible person to preach a Mother's Day sermon.
Yeah.
A man who's divorced. I didn't mention that he was divorced,
Oh.
and his own children did not really like talk to him, giving advice how to raise children.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Do the opposite of what he says.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think the winner all around is Proverbs 31. I think that is the go-to for Mother's Day. And so we got to look at this, right? And for anyone who has the trauma triggers flashing up, don't worry. I promise you Proverbs 31 means nothing that you have ever been taught. In fact, I can guarantee you it is just about the opposite of everything that you have been taught. So I want to look through this, and what I want to do is just kind of like go, not quite verse by verse, but I want you to call out here. Let me know if some stuff stands out to you as not quite right with the traditional reading of this. Because anyone not familiar, Proverbs 31 is the last chapter in Proverbs, and the last 2/3 of it talk about a woman, and it's a mom talking to her son and saying this is the type of woman to look for. So it gets preached as basically be essentially an Amish wife, right? It's like be super modest, be super meek and mild, have good posture.
Be superwoman,
Yeah,
be getting up early.
yeah, take care of the kids, clean the house. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, make your clothes, fold the clothes, do the dishes.
But also be a mild businesswoman.
Yeah, buy some land.
Yeah.
Well, hey, that's not mentioned. That's not. No, I'm just talking about the way it's preached.
Oh.
That's never brought up.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, we'll get to that. but yeah, so it's just very much this stereotypical housewife vibe that gets preached as. But again, this chapter it starts off with the words of King Lemuel, which, by the way, we have absolutely no clue who this dude is. There is no record of any Lemuel anywhere. He is probably a fictional character made up by the authors, much like with Koheleth. We've talked about that in our Ecclesiastes series. So he's saying that these are the words that his mother taught him. So realize this is a king, and this is a queen mother giving advice to her son about how to be a king. And the first several verses are about him and about what he is supposed to do as a king. And she talks about not drinking excessively. Like, if you are a ruler, you have to make wise decisions. One of my favorite parts of this is verse 9, where she says, plead the cause of the poor and needy. We never heard that mentioned in church.
No.
Now, the woman's section starts in verse 10, so this is literally one verse before. And we never heard her advice to him as take care of the poor and needy that are under you. Okay, yeah. We just focus on verse 10 where it starts talking about women. So it says, who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. Now, let me just ask you here. When you hear virtuous woman, what do you think? What does that mean?
Kind of synonymous with, godly or pure or, modest kind of thing.
I agree.
Yeah.
Gladly.
Trad housewife.
High value woman.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Do you know what virtuous actually means there?
Sure you will.
I will. But first, I want to look at, I have Logos Bible software pulled up here. So I want to see how different translations translate this. And I'm pretty confident that like 80% of them are going to say virtuous here. Let's see. King James is virtuous. ESV says excellent wife. That's interesting. They changed woman to wife. Same word in Hebrew. It's Isha. So if you've been in our Genesis 1-6 series, you'll recognize that. It can mean woman. It can mean wife. So that's an interpretive choice to turn it into wife here. Personally, I think it's better with the broad woman. With the broad.
Oh.
You heard it here, folks. Personally, I think it's better with the broad term woman rather than just wife, but that's an interpretive decision. So ESV says excellent, NASB says excellent, ASV says worthy woman. Okay, so we've got Thor going on there, maybe the Natalie Portman version. Good News Bible says, how hard is it to find a capable wife? That was definitely a guy that wrote that verse right there, right? I'm sorry, I was in a college dorm for 4 years. That just sounds like the junior senior guys that haven't been able to get a steady girlfriend. That's what they sound like in the dorms by that point. A little desperation in the voice. I don't know if I can do it accurately, but you got to get some desperation in there. Man, how hard is it to find a capable wife? There we go. Yeah, that's how we got to read that verse. Let's see. New Century says good wife. Nope, that is way off. Young's Literal, a woman of worth. Oh, for Young's Literal, that's not great either. Capable wife, wife of noble character. That's interesting. Mm-hmm. Christian Standard Bible. We're actually getting closer there. MEV. MEV, you disappoint me so much. Why can't you be better? Virtuous woman. I'll tell you why the MEV can't be better is because it solely exists to get King James only people off of the King James. So it can't change too much from the King James. NIV, a wife of noble character. Again, closer, but not quite there. Capable wife, noble character, capable wife, good wife. Okay. A woman of excellence. Okay. Yeah, so a lot of these are pretty similar. The word that's translated virtuous here is the Hebrew word chayil, and it literally means strength. It is a military word. This thing is used a couple hundred times in the Bible, and every single time it is used in military context, talking about a strong warrior, except for the 4 times in the entirety of the Tanakh that it is used in reference of a woman, and the King James always translates it virtuous, just because the sex is different.
Women can't be strong.
Yeah, this is a warrior. That's what this is literally who can find Wonder Woman.
Well, you can't hear that in a church because then you're going to be locking horns with your husband who you're supposed to be submitting to.
Right. This is not trad wife. This is a strong warrior woman that she is asking, can you find this person? Now, throughout Proverbs, concepts are constantly spoken of in a feminine gender. We do this today. We talk about boats as she or something, it's that sort of thing. So we have characteristics consistently personified in women. You have an adulterous woman throughout Proverbs, someone who's a prostitute, basically, that tries to lure people away from the path of righteousness in Proverbs. But then you also have Lady Wisdom in Proverbs, and she's constantly fighting against this prostitute woman throughout the book of Proverbs for the affection of the reader of the book. So I personally think that this woman in Proverbs 31 is not someone that is actually attainable. I don't think this is an attainable goal. I think that this is actually talking about Lady Wisdom. And all of this description here in this chapter is the climax of 31 chapters about chasing Lady Wisdom. And this is like a final poem talking about all of the things that she does. Now, before you think I'm too far off on that, the rest of this verse 10, for her price is far above rubies. That word rubies is not used often in the Bible. It's the Hebrew word penanim. And Of course, it does not mean rubies. Classic King James with obscure words does not do a good job translating. It has the idea of like pearls, basically. There can be like some red coral to it, so I get why they said rubies, but it's not rubies how we think of it today. But it is used almost entirely in the context of wisdom. It's only used 5 times. First time in Job, no mention will be made of coral or of pearls, for the price of wisdom is far above rubies. Proverbs 8:11 is almost a direct quote of that. For wisdom is better than rubies. Proverbs 20:15, there is gold, a multitude of rubies, but the lips of knowledge are a precious jewel. And then we have this verse, and then Lamentations 4:7, which is lamenting the loss of the Israelites in the land. It says, her Nazarites were purer than snow, whiter than milk, more ruddy in body than rubies. So again, it's describing women in this same terminology as Proverbs 31. So I think the Lamentations is drawing on Proverbs 31, which is drawing on the others, which is talking about wisdom. So this is all embedded in there. So instead of guilting women for not being all of these things, we should be saying no woman can be all of this. No human can be all of this. This is an ideal, a character trait that's just out there that all people are trying to attain to. Verse 11 says, the heart of her husband safely trusts in her. I don't know why they put safely in there. That bugs me because that word's not there. It's just one verb. And it means to trust. But, I mean, think about that. Why would an ancient man trust a woman? Like, it was a very patriarchal culture. You're not trusting your wife with stuff, right? So this is already more about the husband and the way that he treats her. This isn't just about her. This is talking now about the way that she is treated by those around her. The way that men treat women. Maybe Mother's Day sermons should be more to the men and how to treat people. But not really. I've already said that I don't like Mother's Day sermons in the first place. But if you have to have them, maybe tell the men to stop being creepy. But okay, here's something that I want your opinions on. Do you remember anything here? Have you heard anything here preached about the end of verse 11? The heart of her husband will safely trust in her so that he has no need of spoil. Either of you ever hear anything with that? Like preached?
I'm sure I have.
She's not going to say or do anything that's going to reflect poorly on him.
Oh, okay.
Is what I remember.
Oh, okay. So the way that this was taught, at least to men, is that he's not going to want to have an affair.
Yeah, that's the way that I was interpreting it.
The heart of her husband trusts in her so that he has no need of spoil. The spoil is an adulterous affair. So basically, she doesn't say no to him so that he doesn't have to go to anyone else.
That would not be preached from the pulpit.
In some churches.
Well, not in the one that I attended.
No, I mean, they wouldn't talk about sex at all.
Right.
But yeah, this was actually a thing. It's like that, yeah, that he won't go have an affair because she's too sexy. But again, this has nothing to do with it. The word spoil there, it is plunder, it's goods, but it's not talking about an affair. It's actually saying that she is such a good business person that he doesn't have to worry about finances. Because where it says he will have no need of spoil, that's actually no lack, no desire for, he won't be lacking goods, supplies, food. This is just a very pragmatic, practical thing, saying he has enough in his house. Which, isn't it interesting that she's the businesswoman? Does that sound weird to the two of you in an ancient context?
Oh, in an ancient context, yes.
Like, come on, this should be the first thing that is throwing up alarm bells in our minds going, this is not an actual woman.
Right, when you consider when it was written in that way, yes.
Yeah, it's almost like context matters, right?
Yes.
Right, an ancient woman is not going to have the capacity to do these things. And if she did, it would only be because her husband was dead. And she was really, really wealthy. Well, at the end of this chapter, it mentions her husband. So we know that's not her.
Right.
So I think any ancient reader looking at, well, not reader, they would be hearing it. I think that any ancient person hearing this would go, yeah, right. They know this is not attainable. And yet we have just used this to burden women when that's not the point at all. Verse 13 says, she seeks wool and flax and works willingly with her hands. And this was always she sews her own clothes. She does the dishes. You know what? Now, I haven't found this anywhere else. So this is Colin's biblical theology going on here. This could be absolute heresy. But I have a serious inclination that I think this is presenting Lady Wisdom as the intermediary between you and God. The closer you get to this Lady Wisdom, the closer you are to God. Now, why the heck would I say that based on wool and flax? Because those words for wool and flax are very rare in the Tanakh. They show up only a handful of times, and the majority of the times they do are in Leviticus 13, which is in reference to clothing laws, regulations about when there is a disease that gets into the clothes. So Leviticus 13 constantly talks about, it says leprosy. It's not actual leprosy like Hansen's disease today. It's a different kind. It's another issue for another day. Leprosy in the Bible is not leprosy as we think of it today. But all throughout Leviticus 13 is the garment that has the plague of leprosy in it, whether it's a woolen garment or a linen garment. And it's all these things about how to cleanse that out. Ritual purification. Stuff that a priest would do. And she's the one who recognizes that. So I don't think this is about her making clothes. I think this is actually saying that she inspects the clothes to make sure that there's no disease in them, which is what a priest would do.
Right.
She's like a priestess. It's crazy. Like, you would never hear that preached.
It's almost like God isn't sexist.
Right, just the pastors are. She's like a merchant ship. She brings her food from afar. Again, ancient world.
Mhm.
You don't bring food from afar. It's going to go bad. There's no refrigeration. There's no preservation. This is ridiculous. This is unachievable.
And you know, as you're going through it, it makes me angry.
Right?
What was taught to us from the pulpit, because basically we were taught, be busy all the time.
Yes.
And I know you even comment on it. I can't sit and do nothing.
Yes.
It's still ingrained in me. The one time you saw me sitting on the sofa, you're like, what's wrong with you?
I thought you might be dying. I don't think I've ever seen that.
But this is what was ingrained into me, you know, constantly be,
Oh, yeah.
if a woman is doing all of these things, she doesn't rest until she goes to sleep
Yeah.
at night.
No, I mean, listen, 2 years ago now, your husband almost died. My dad was like a day away from dying. And I am twice your size in weight, which may possibly even more. That may be an insult to you. I literally had to pin you down just to get you to sit down in that.
Mm-hmm.
Hey,
No, it's true.
yeah. And as we start to go through this thing, it's literally, you can't do this in 24 hours. You couldn't do this in 40 hours.
That's why I said it was exhausting.
Yeah.
It was exhausting.
This is American workaholism that we read into this passage and think it's a virtue.
Mm-hmm.
I think any ancient reader would be like, okay, is this her year's checklist? But instead we preach it to women like this is your day checklist.
It was daily.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ugh.
You know, she gets her food from afar. I remember thinking back then, I have to go from store to store to store
What?
to get the very best
No,
deal
because
because this is what
No.
yes, I am not kidding you.
Ain't no way.
Yeah, I am mentally screwed up.
Oh,
Kidding.
I have not heard that one before.
Mhm.
Oh,
I can twist every verse in this chapter.
you were a Baptist for 20 years. That's what you do.
Yes, and into my day.
Oh.
No, I mean, what she's saying makes perfect sense because, you know, you're at college, you know, what is it, biblical womanhood or whatever?
Yep, you actually, the
Christian-
girls had to take a class on being a Christian woman.
Yeah, and you know, we covered this verse and it was, you know, yeah, you got to go out and get the food and,
Mhm.
you know, also you have to wake up earlier than everybody. and
Right, here it is, verse 15, she rises while it's still night.
Yeah, have
Mhm.
everything ready and just serve everyone. And it's like unrealistic.
Right, which, again, wisdom, and all throughout the wisdom literature of the Bible, the wisdom books especially, there is reference to wisdom being there at creation with God. Can you think of someone else who worked at night? God started creation, the evening and the morning were the first day,
Mm.
right? Like, here it is again. She's put on parallel with God because Lady Wisdom was there at creation, according to the poetical books.
I'm still too busy being mad about what I was taught.
Oh, it'll get worse. You can keep getting mad about this. All right, I'm going to read verse 15 and stop me when you hear something that's a little off here. She rises while it's also yet night. She gives meat to her household and a portion to her maidens. Anyone see anything wrong with that? That didn't get preached?
Portion to her maidens?
Yeah.
This woman has slaves.
Yeah, we skipped over that.
She is a wealthy, land-owning, probably royalty. She has slaves. And I'm not trying to get into the whole morality of slavery thing here. I'm just saying this is not your average woman. You realize the average person back then was more likely to be a slave than to have a slave?
Right.
This is not attainable for 90% of your population when it was written. We need to be rethinking this here. She considers a field and buys it. Again, ancient context. What woman is doing this?
Oh, I forgot about that, where she plants a vineyard and
Grow your own food.
yeah, grow your own food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, serious Bible trivia time here for you, since we're talking about royalty, queens, kings. Can you think of any story of a queen with a field?
Yeah, it's on the tip of my tongue. Is that the Naboth's vineyard?
Hello. This is a polemic against Jezebel. Jezebel saw a vineyard, and she didn't pay for it. She took it from Naboth,
And this is a queen, like,
who sees a field she wants, but she buys it herself.
interesting.
Come on. All right, look, verse 17. She girds her loins with strength and strengthens her arms. She's supposed to be a bodybuilder, too. This is, what's the girl from Encanto? The surface pressure. Everyone with any kids is probably screaming it out right now. Comment on the socials and let us know what it is, though. I forgot. Right? So she's supposed to look like her. Here we go. Here's something here. Verse 18. She perceives that her merchandise is good. All right? That word perceives there, it actually means to eat. Now, merchandise here is talking about, like, trade, profit that you get from trading. Why the heck would you use the word eat there unless you're trying to put her on par with Eve, who eats something that she perceives as good? But this time it's actually good because she's Lady Wisdom. There is literally no freaking reason to use a word that means eat here in this verse. It could have said ra'ah. There are so many words for seeing that they could have used, but they didn't. They used the word for eat. Right next to tov. Good. She eats something good. Oh, my word. Her candle doesn't go out by night. Here she is again. I think this is a play with some priestly language, because candles aren't mentioned that much in the Bible, especially the Tanakh. But when they are, it is almost always in the temple, and the candle, the menorah in the temple, was never supposed to go out at night.
No, Colin. She's staying up late working so that she can also get up early and work.
No, that's American workaholic. Do you see this, though? She gets up while it's still night and she works into the night.
Yeah.
Do you see why this doesn't work? It
Yeah.
just does not work. But what if this is suggesting that she has a priestly role?
I mean, that makes way more sense.
Oh, and it's beautiful. Verse 20, she stretches out her hand to the poor. And again, this is something that we didn't talk about. That one was always conveniently skipped over.
Right.
She stretches forth her hand to the needy. She's not afraid of the snow for her household, for all the household are clothed in scarlet. Come on, this is royalty clothing again. What average Israelite family is wearing scarlet? And then the next verse, coverings of tapestry and silk and purple. Stop reading this like a moderner. Read this like an ancient Israelite and start laughing with them as they're going, this is impossible. Because it's never meant to be for the average person. It's a caricature. Her husband is known in the gates. He sits among the elders of the land. So again, this is someone, she probably wouldn't have a husband at this point, but she does here. She makes fine linen and sells it, delivers girdles unto and it's really weird that it says merchant there, at least in King James and a couple others. It's actually the word Canaanite. This is a major interpretive decision that a few translations made here to say merchant. And I get why they did. That's a whole rabbit hole. But I think this is actually saying something about, like, God bringing the nations back to him. Even the Canaanites are served by Lady Wisdom. Like, come on. But, oh, man, that's not even if you have a bad sermon that you're going to miss that. That's thanks to translations. Oh, so the Bible ain't boring, kids. This is beautiful. Again, strength and honor are her clothing. Like, this is a crazy freaking Wonder Woman. This is an Amazon right here. This is insane. She opens her mouth with, hello, wisdom. And in her tongue is the Torah, the law of kindness. She is the sum of the Torah. Come on, this is Lady Wisdom. This is amazing. Her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but you excel them all. I think this is so interesting. It turns from being third person to now being second person. And you can look at that as now the author or the speaker has now turned and spoken to Lady Wisdom directly. Or I like to think he's actually talking to the women in front of him that might be listening to this and saying, many women do well, but y'all are the best. And maybe that's a stretch, but man, I can't think of a better way to do a Mother's Day sermon than that right there. Take a lesson from Lemuel and his mother here. And we can't forget verse 31, the end of this. Give her of the fruit of her hands. Come on. Garden, Eden, Eve, creation, Lady Wisdom, all of this, all together here at the end of a book that has been about all throughout Proverbs. There's trees and a tree of wisdom and a tree of life. Like, all of this is Genesis 1 language. Genesis 1 through 3. It's amazing.
I'm thinking in the church, they take this and they make it abusive.
Yes.
Instead of teaching it that way, the way that it really is, and making it beautiful literature.
Yes.
Where you can just be in awe of how it all comes together. And instead, it's used to abuse people.
Mm-hmm.
That's so sad.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't do the scripture justice. And I'm still mad.
And well, you should be. No, I'm serious. The Bible is meant to be a book of healing and wisdom. And if that's not what you're getting out of it, you might not be the problem. It might be the sources that you're listening to. You might need to change churches, pastors, or books that you read, or podcasts that you listen to. Like, the way this was presented is not healthy.
Mm-hmm.
The way that we've tried to present it here today, you say it's a beautiful work of literature.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's amazing stuff. And I mean, we could spend another hour digging into it. That's just an overview. And there's other passages too that get used about women, but I really wanted to focus on Proverbs 31 because it is a great case study to show you that these passages should never be used to put down, abuse, put a heavy weight. I mean, didn't Jesus say that his yoke is easy, his burden light? Like, if you go to church and you leave feeling worse than you came in, you need to find a new church. And I think this is a great example of way that passages get misused, and our pastors are not trained properly. They don't know this ancient context. They don't know that they are sharing a beautiful work of literature. And instead, they just run roughshod over it to try to get to some devotional point they want to make.
3-point sermon.
And a poem, if you're lucky. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, we could have gone into so much more here, but I hope this has been an encouragement to you. I know we did this kind of ironically, but in all seriousness, the Bible is a beautiful book that, yes, it's in a patriarchal culture. There is some absolutely problematic stuff about women in it, but there is also some beautiful messages in there, and so much better than what we have heard before. So I hope this has been a little bit of a healing and fun expedition through some of that. And I hope it gives you permission as well to rethink the passages that have been used and misused regarding motherhood and women in the church. And whether you're listening to it early today on Mother's Day or the next time it rolls around, do what you have to do to take care of yourself. Be healthy spiritually, physically, emotionally, and that is the way that you can please God best through this all. And with that, I just want to say a thank you again to those who have participated in sharing their stories, and a big thank you to Janna and to Stephanie, my mom, as well, for being a part of this, and for all of you listening. So until next week,
stay curious and keep asking questions about what your church teaches about Mother's Day and about the Uncut and Unfiltered Bible.
love it. You've been listening to the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered. We hope we provided a healing place to discuss the questions you can't ask and the context you won't learn in church. If you enjoyed the podcast, would you take a minute to share it with a friend? You could also rate and review on your podcast app. If you'd like to donate to keep our work going, you can go to our website, thebibleuncut.com, and click on the Support Us tab. While you're there, check out the recommended resources and blog where we post show notes and other articles. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.